Okay. So remember, this is going to be a brand new scene, right? I'm starting a new model, which is going to be our chandelier. So when you first load up Blender, right, remember, you can just go right to General, New File, General. Click on that. It'll create this cube. Now, I like to switch from layout to modeling workspace, right? That way I'm in my modeling mode. I've got some of my modeling tools there. Also, remember, we don't like the light and the camera visible. So I usually go to the outliner up here in the corner. We just left click on those. If you want to organize these into a different way, you don't have to, but if you want to kind of put them in their own little thing, you can actually right-click in the outliner, and there's an option called New Collection. You see how there's Collection and Collection 2? You can actually just drag and drop the camera and light into their own collection. That way you kind of have them a little bit kind of separated out, right? So you can actually create collections. You don't have to. It's kind of cool, right? It's kind of like a group in Blender. So yeah, you can do that. Now in this case, I don't really want a cube for the chandelier. Chandeliers kind of tend to be kind of more like a ring shape, right? So remember, 4 is object mode. Remember, these are on the whiteboard, right? So if there's still any mini quiz you have to take, just look up at the whiteboard for most of them, right? The only ones we don't have yet up on there are the triangle quad. Tomorrow's will be N-Gon, and then I'll kind of start putting those up on the board as well. But remember, object select is 4, right? I'm going to delete this object. Delete, right? We'll delete it. And what I can do is I can go to the Add menu. And the nice thing is we've seen Add several times already, right? We've seen this before, right? So once you go to Object Mode, you can either delete the cube, which in this case I didn't want, and then I can go to Add Mesh, right? There's an Add menu up here, Mesh, Cylinder. Now, when it creates the cylinder by default, right, it should put it in this collection. But remember, there's the bottom left corner here, right? It's not the very bottom left corner, but it's almost the bottom left corner. You should see a word that says Add Cylinder. If I click on that and open it, remember, this gives us the ability to adjust radius, depth. We can rotate stuff. In this case, we don't want to. I don't really feel like I need 32 on this one, right? So I'm actually going to go with more like, I feel like 24, right? Now, you do want that kind of number of vertices. That's kind of your sides, right? That's controlling how many kind of polygons you have around the circumference, diameter, right? The circumference of the cylinder. Usually you want that to be an even number, particularly for what we're going to do today, right? In fact, odd numbers usually, unless you really, really need odd numbers, are not that good for this stuff. Even numbers, right? That'll work great for us. But I didn't quite want 32, so I said like 24. I'm going to close that up because that's kind of already where we want it to be. Now, remember, technically I can manipulate this object at the object level, move, rotate it, scale it at the object level, but then it kind of reorients the positions of the location, the rotation. You can fix that by going to Object, Apply All Transforms, and that will actually kind of reset those things. But oftentimes it's just easier to kind of do it through Edit mode, right? That way the object is kind of staying zeroed out for the position, the rotation staying 0, the scale staying kind of the 1, right? So remember, Edit mode, there's 3 quick keys that get us there, 1, 2, and 3. But remember, it is a menu up here, right? So hopefully at this point you should start remembering those quick keys pretty well because, well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? There's not actually that much hard to remember about it. They're up on the board. But remember, there is the Edit mode menu right up here, and we can go to Edit mode. Once we're in Edit mode, you will see there is Vertex Edge Face right there. In this case, everything's already selected. If it's not, you can go to Select All, right? There's a Select menu. And this is a little too kind of tall. So I'm going to hit R for Scale, right? Remember, it's up on the board right there. W-E-R, Move, Rotate, Scale. Remember, they are buttons right here, though. So I could left-click drag on this blue handle, the Z-axis, to scale it down. There we go. But I can also grab the white one on the outside here, right? See this white circle? And if I left-click drag on that, that kind of uniform scales everything up. Remember, middle mouse button, if we're using industry compatible, will also do that. Remember, Edit Preferences, that's where if you go to Key Map, you turn industry compatible on. I'm a big fan of industry compatible. I feel like it's, in terms of ergonomics and muscle memory, and even just kind of being able to memorize it, it makes more sense, right? And it's basically the way most of the industry does it, right? Blender's default ones are a bit unique. And sometimes they're fine, and then sometimes they don't make much sense. Big fan of industry compatible. Remember, for your progress checks, window, save screenshot, right? I don't know how to do a screenshot. Yeah, you do. We've done it in the videos a ton of times. I've talked about it a ton of times. Technically, if you take a picture with your phone, right, and you have Teams on your phone, you could upload it from there. But Windows save screenshot, and just save it to your desktop, right? That way you know how to easily find it. Give it a name, that's it, that's save screenshot. And then you just upload it. So just kind of some quick reminders of that stuff. You've seen this in earlier videos, but it never hurts to kind of constantly remind about those things, right? So I've just kind of made this a little bit bigger with the scale tool, kind of made it, shorter or taller with just the red handle, or the blue handle, right, the Z. Remember, Q is your quick key for your select tool. Q is your quick key for your select tool, right? Now, I don't really want the top and the bottom polygons, right? So I'm just going to 3 for face, right? We're in edit mode already. But I've also clicked on that last one, face. 3 is the quick key for that. But I can left click on that face and then shift left click on the face below it, right? Remember, shift usually in Blender actually adds or subtracts, right? It usually does both. Sometimes, like with circle select, control does the subtract, right? But usually shift will do both. Sometimes control will subtract. Just remember shift and control. They're right there, pretty easy to follow. Remember, to delete polygons, you hit the delete key, and it brings these options up. Now you'll notice that I delete faces enough and dissolve edges enough because that lets you take an edge loop out properly. It'll take the edge loop and the vertices out, leaving all the polygons around it normal, right? That's why I've added quick keys to those. Remember, right-click on a key, and it says change short because I've already added one, but if you haven't changed it, you'll see only a signed shortcut. And then all you have to do is click on it and just Shift-D, type it, and it adds it. But delete will bring these options up. Go to faces. It deletes those faces. All right, deletes those faces. Now, that's paper thin. Paper thin stuff is really only paper, right? So generally things have thickness, right? They're thick, right? They're not paper thin. Technically, cloth is close enough to being paper thin that particularly in video games you'll kind of usually have it be paper thin, not thickened. But most things should have thickness. It's kind of like bevels, right? We've talked about this before. There are good reasons not to have a bevel if something's really far away or it's just too big to be able to notice the bevel. Often video games will cut corners and not bevel everything because they have to manage polygon counts, right? So there are good reasons not to thicken and bevel, but they should kind of be your default, right? You should bevel corners or thicken stuff because that's what things usually have. And then there needs to be a compelling reason for not to, like it's really far away, or we have to worry about a polygon like video game budgets, how polygon counts work. So how do we thicken stuff? Well, there are 2 ways in Blender. One is in the face menu called Solidify Faces. We're not going to use that because I find that is a little bit slower in terms of its performance. Also, particularly if it's kind of along a center with a mirror, it doesn't sew up the center. Having said that, Solidify Faces can specifically thicken just some of the polygons you've selected, right? So that's actually cool. So it's neat that there's actually a specific tool for it, and that has some cool uses. However, I find myself a lot more times just using Extrude along normal direction to do this. So in this case, I'm going to go to Select menu, Select All. There's a quick key for it, Control A. Now, if I right-click, we've been seeing that right-click a lot more lately, right? The last couple of new lectures, last couple of videos, last probably 2 weeks, we've been seeing right-click a lot more. When you right-click, whatever selection mode you're in, it'll be that context menu. In this case, I'm in face mode, right? We're in faces, 3. Right-click, we're in face context menu. You will see that you have a tool called Extrude Faces Along Normals. Now, we haven't talked about normal direction as much. I think we've dabbled with it, mentioned it here and there. Eventually, it will be a quiz for us, right? Essentially put, normal direction is the direction your polygon points, right? So this face right here will point this direction. That polygon right here points this direction. This polygon here points that direction, right? Polygons kind of have an orientation, right? A way they're facing or pointing, right? That's basically your normal direction. So when you right-click and go down to extrude face along normals, what it's going to do is it's going to extrude your faces along normal directions. Now here's the thing about extrude face along normals. If you do it to polygons that are all connected, right? Like if I just selected a few of these, extrude along faces won't do thicken. It'll just do a normal extrusion. But since these are all selected, the connected ones anyways, because if you had a couple of separate objects or part of the object, you could do stuff like that. We'll see that a little more on our spaceship. We don't really need it on this project, but all the connected polygons, right? All the linked ones, right? All the linked polygons. If you right-click and you extrude face along normal direction, and just kind of move your cursor up or down, you notice how it actually extrudes all those faces along their normal direction, but you'll notice that it actually kept the original polygons there and flipped them, and we've just thickened an object. Isn't that cool? Think about what you do with armor and certain aspects of clothing for a character creature. Obviously, this is modeling B, which is hard surface, but my modeling A course, which if some of you guys explored my YouTube channel more, you'd see the modeling A course stuff in there too, right? I know some of you guys have watched it a little bit. And of course, I offer that, right? That was what we just did. That's the class I taught the first semester, right? Earlier this year, end of 2021. So that's really cool. And we'll see that more on our spaceship in particular. But extrude faces along normals, that's really, really neat, right? That's really cool. So that's one of the things I want to show you. Now, the other thing is how we can just extrude some faces along normals, but also, what if I wanted to kind of extrude out, because usually a chandelier maybe have like little parts that come off where the globes will go. And that's one of the things I wanted to show you, right? So what if I wanted to select every other face, right? So maybe we're in 3 for face mode. I left click on this face. I'm going to shift left click on this face, but you notice how I skipped one. Does everybody see that? You notice how I skipped one. I could skip 2 if I wanted to on this as well. And this is where having even numbers makes it really easy. But if we go to the select menu, we've noticed that there's more or less. Now, more or less would take all of the faces that are next to these faces and grow them, right? Add more polygons to that selection, expand it. However, you will notice a little bit further down in the select more or less area is next active, previous active. Now, you will notice you do not have default quick keys for that. They're a lot like more or less. So I said, hey, I'm going to do shift up arrow and shift down arrow. So I added these quick keys on my own. Right click, change shortcut, shift up arrow. There we go. For you guys, you'll probably see a sign shortcut, right? You want to change or remove, those have a sign. But same process. You highlight it, it pops up, hey, what key do you want to make it? Shift up arrow. Watch what next active does. It grows out a loop, but it also can skip. So it'll kind of technically, within limited range, grow out a pattern. So if I keep using my quick key for it, you see how I can expand out? That's what next active does. Previous active goes the reverse. So you see how it's a lot like more or less, but it's based on a loop, and this works for faces or edge loops. But also, if you skip, it will skip also. You just have to at least have 2 to kind of let it know what pattern to do, right? So you always have to select at least 2. If you do 2 right next to each other, it'll just be a full grow or shrink loop, more or less loop. If you skip, it'll skip also. Now, do you have to use this tool to get the selection? No. You could manually just select every other one. But now you know. So that's kind of one of those things. You don't have to use this, but it is super cool that Blender has this, right? Blender has some of the best selection tools I've used. The actual overall selection tools and workflow is pretty awesome, right? It's like right up there with, until I finally fell in love with Blender, I was a big Moto fan, right? So, right up there. Blender's pretty great. So, you don't have to use these because you can just manually shift left, click, shift left, click, shift left, click, but you notice how it's a bit quicker? But now you know what that does. So, you don't have to use next or previous active, but they're cool, right? They're pretty cool. So, take advantage of them. Now, if I right-click and I bring up my face context menu, I can extrude faces along normals again. And you see how if I move my cursor up So it actually extrudes those faces out along each normal direction. So you see how cool extrude face along normals in this context can be? Oftentimes you don't want that. But there are times when extruding face along normals is super cool. It can thicken, but also if it's not being done to all linked faces, it doesn't thicken, it just does a regular extrusion. It just moves those extrusions along normal directions. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to turn my rotate tool on. E for rotate. It's a good idea in Blender 3 to either make sure that select box in drag or active tools on. If tweaks on, it can kind of deselect when you zoom, right? So always a good idea to kind of either have select box on or active tool. I prefer active tool most of the time, but sometimes select box is cool. You have some neat options there. Just keep in mind that there is a drag function for like some of these tools here, and you just might want to make sure. I find usually active tools good. The last thing I wanted to show you was, by default, I've turned rotate tool on. And watch what happens if I use default rotate. That's not exactly what I wanted to do, right? So maybe if I try the green, nope, right? Now blue will do something kind of interesting, right? That's you might want to use that sometimes, right? Not exactly what I wanted though. How can I take this manipulator and make it rotate these independently on their own, kind of on their own orientation? Right, thank you. Okay. So how can I actually do that, right? Because right now this is basically set to global. Right up here, and this is going to be the last thing we're going to talk about today. Right up here, there's this global, word global, and then there's what looks like a chain link. These are both important. If I click on global, that's what it's set to by default. That's world. Global, world. So you notice how the manipulator is right on the center of the selection, and it's oriented to the world. A lot of the time, that's what you want. But this time, I want to actually use the normal directions. Right? You see how there's an option called normal? You see how it kind of orients, kind of trying to kind of orient to the normal directions of each one? That's not enough, though. Right next to that word global, pull down right here, there's a chain link. It's kind of right next to the magnet, right? If I click on that, you notice by default it's set to median point. That's the middle, right? Median means middle, average. So median means the center of your selection. You'll notice you can do active element, which is actually really cool, but we don't need it here. But there's also one called individual origins. So if you actually change this to normal, the transform orientation to normal, and you change the transform position, right, because if you hover over that a little bit, it says transform pivot point, to individual origins, what that does is each one of these faces now will have its own individual manipulator aligned to the normal direction. And now you'll see that you can try stuff. You see how I can actually twist each of these on their own? And you see if I use the y-axis, you see how it kind of rotates them all down? And even red can kind of do a twist that way. So you see how that actually kind of sets it up so that each face gets its own individual localized manipulator that's aligned to the normal direction, but also each one is working individual to the others. This is another area that Blender's quite good at. And this isn't magic. There have been times when I've turned those on and it doesn't work exactly the way I expect it to, right? It does a lot of the time, though. So it's quite reliable. Not 100% reliable. There are instances where I'm like, oh, darn it, it's not doing exactly what I want it to, right? So you have to get in and do it manually. But you'll notice there's more options than just global and normal. Like I said, it's view, cursor. We're going to see cursor stuff a lot more on our next project. Active element, 3D cursor, right? So when you actually understand that you have these features here, that allows you to kind of have your manipulator oriented differently for each stuff. And that sometimes comes in really handy. Usually world and medium point will be fine a lot of the time, right? So the defaults are usually good a lot of the time. But there are times when you're going to want some of these other options. And Blender's versions of these are quite good, right? They're up there with some of the better ones I've used. They're quite good. So that's kind of what I really wanted to get you guys to see a little bit today was that. This even works with scale. If I switch to scale and I do uniform scale, you notice how I can kind of, make those kind of wider or thinner, thicker on their own. So this works with all of your tools, move, rotate, and scale. All right, I'm going to save this as. We'll call this 3D Modeling B, Chandelier. I think I'm spelling it correctly. I might be misspelling it, but that'll be good enough. There we go. And that should be a good place to stop.